Some of us are raised to believe that the mark of a good person is how quickly they say yes. Yes to helping, yes to giving, yes to carrying more than their share. It sounds noble, but it often ends with exhaustion. And for many of my clients, spiritual entrepreneurs especially, the ones who are building businesses from the heart, it shows up in the sneakiest ways. Today's story is about that very thing. How overgiving looks, how it feels, and what it takes to slowly rewire a lifetime of yeses. Welcome to the Inspiritude Effect, the podcast where spirit meets story and dreams really do come true. I'm your host, Kathy Sherwood, and around here we talk about transformation in every form. Spiritual nudges, reinventions, purpose, money, relationships, and everything to help make a fantastic life. Sometimes it's just me. Sometimes we bring in guests and co-hosts with their own kind of magic. But every time, it's a place to come back to yourself. So let's begin. Carol, my neighbor from years back, was one of those people. Her porch light was always on, her car was always ready, and her kitchen smelled like cinnamon or ginger or whatever she was baking for someone else that week. If you needed sandwiches, she made them. If you needed a late night ear, she brewed tea and stayed up until the early hours. Everyone said Carol's a saint, and she'd smile at that, even while her shoulders sagged, her eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. One December, she promised 3 different groups she'd bake cookies for the holiday fair. By the Friday night after an incredibly busy week, she was measuring sugar with one hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. She forgot the sugar in the first tray, burned the second while answering the phone, and fell asleep on the couch while the third batch sat half rolled. The next morning, she showed up with a tray of lopsided gingerbread and dark crescents under her eyes. People thanked her anyway, and she laughed it off. That's what overgivers do. And I recognized myself in her. I was the same way, an overgiver, a people pleaser, saying yes before the question was even finished. I said yes to every favor, every invitation, every request for just a little more at work. I undercharged for coaching sessions. I added extra hours I never billed for, threw in resources for free because I wanted to be generous, to serve generously. I said yes to clients, yes to colleagues, and yes to family. My calendar was crammed, my energy drained, and still I smiled like it was no big deal. Growing up, I'd heard over and over again, it's better to give than to receive. I had accepted that as gospel. But what I've learned over the years, that's just not exactly true. You can't actually reach your goals in life or in business if your whole identity is built on giving while refusing to receive. You can't build wealth. You can't build impact. You can't build joy on an empty tank. And you know, when your nervous system has been wired to overgive, it isn't as simple as just deciding to stop. It isn't a switch you can flip. You stop giving with every request? Well, the guilt arrives like clockwork. The fear of being selfish creeps in. The old conditioning, what we were taught to be true, whispers, you're only valuable if you give more than you get. So, you overgive again, in friendships, with family, at work, in your business. You discount your prices, you work late without charging extra, you promise 3 trays of cookies when 1 would have been more than enough. In order to break that pattern, I had to reach for something a little bit radical, because the gentle approach didn't work for me. Every time I tried to be reasonable about it, I'd end up back where I started, nodding along to commitments I didn't want and agreeing to things that left me feeling like a wrung-out dishcloth. Eventually, I drew a line in the sand that felt both terrifying and strangely hopeful. I decided to have what I called my no days. These were not glamorous or enlightened, not boundary queen moments. These were days where every request that floated my way, no matter how tiny or polite or tempting, received a no from me. I didn't do it to be difficult. I did it because I needed the practice. It was impossible for me to actually sort the acceptable no's from the unacceptable ones without guilt running the whole show. So I removed the sorting altogether. Everything became a no so I could give my nervous system a break from the constant emotional negotiations I kept losing, and so that I could set a pattern. And I didn't announce any of this. There was no declaration, no social media moment, or no, guess what, everyone, I'm working on my boundaries. I simply said no, with my voice doing that shaky little quiver and my stomach doing something I can only describe as a slow motion cartwheel. Sometimes it came out too soft, like I was actually apologizing for existing. Sometimes it came out too sharp, like I'd even startled myself. And sometimes the whole thing was so awkward, I had to laugh afterward because the alternative was spiraling straight into overthinking and would have probably led to a yes. But a funny thing happened. The world actually kept spinning. Nobody called the boundary police. Nothing collapsed. People survived with my no, even when I expected them to be disappointed or confused or offended. And my body, which had always tightened at the thought of letting someone down, started to understand something new. Saying no didn't mean I was unkind or unreliable or selfish. It meant I was reclaiming space I'd been giving away without a second thought. Slowly, almost shyly even, my system learned that no was safe. And when that really settled, something opened. I realized that no wasn't the ending of anything. No was the doorway. No was a clearing. No was what finally made room for me to receive what I'd been praying for in the first place. Ease, time, presence, and the feeling that my own life actually belonged to me. And in business, I experimented with something that surprised me a little. It felt very simple on paper, although it took a surprising amount of inner wrangling to actually do it. Back when my client roster looked more like a dusty bookshelf than a booming practice, I had oceans of time, which meant I had oceans of opportunities to overgive, overdeliver, and generally behave as if generosity alone could do the heavy lifting of building a business for me. I would add extra sessions, linger far too long in the ones I had, and let my calendar stretch in directions that really made no logical sense. It felt generous, although it drained me. Eventually, I tried a different approach. I acted as if my schedule was already full. I behaved as the version of me who had a thriving roster and a wait list. That meant I delivered only what I would deliver if I truly were booked out. No bonus hours, no endless lingering, no stuffing value into places where it didn't need to be. This was my professional version of the no days. And yes, it punched the guilt button in the same familiar way. The guilt flared up, then made space, and then flared up again, because apparently guilt has more stamina than most ultra marathoners. Yet the more I practiced, the more I learned something precious. I began valuing my time. I began valuing my energy. And I began valuing the expertise I had worked so long and so quietly to build. Once I felt that shift in myself, I started teaching it to my clients too. Build your business like you expect it to be full. Build it with the structure you would need if every slot were taken. Build it with the boundaries you would use if you were already thriving, because that structure becomes the container that holds the growth when it shows up. One client of mine took this to heart. She had been giving away extra hours the way some people hand out samples at a Costco. Cheerful, abundant, and completely unsustainable. When she finally trimmed her packages to match what she could truly deliver if she were fully booked, a few things clicked. And a few months later, she was no longer racing around trying to keep everyone happy. Her clients respected her time, and she had energy again. She had space to do the marketing, space to rest, and space to breathe. And that space opened the door to, guess what? More clients, which still makes me smile because this is how this work goes. You stop giving yourself away, and suddenly the world sees you more clearly. And just for the record, I have proudly become that kind of person who brings store-bought brownies to the bake sale and thinks nothing of it. No twitching, no guilt sweats, no midnight attempts at artisanal frosting. I long since graduated to being able to pass the tin over with a smile and place it confidently between the homemade lemon squares and the gluten-free pumpkin loaf. Because sometimes that's what a boundary looks like. It comes in a plastic container with a crisp little label that says, "Made in a facility far away from my kitchen," and proud of it. Overgiving can look generous from a distance. It can even feel noble for a moment because you get to see yourself stepping in again and again like you're the designated hero of the day. And the reality is much quieter. Overgiving behaves like a slow leak that you don't notice until every part of you feels a little heavier than it should. It settles in behind the eyes and at the back of your ribs. It leaves a faint ache that shows up as resentment you have trouble admitting and bitterness you really never meant to cultivate. It wears many costumes. Some of them look almost charming. You become the one who always offers the ride before anyone asks because you figure you're going that way anyway. You always make the meal even when you're longing for someone else to take the lead. And you answer the phone when you're bone tired, letting yourself feel thoughtful. And maybe you are. Although there comes a point when your yes is coming from habit rather than presence. In business, overgiving puts on different outfits. You price your services as if you need to apologize for charging at all. You deliver so much extra that you begin to resent the very clients you once prayed for. You say yes to collaborations that don't light you up because you don't want to disappoint anyone, even though you know in your gut this is not your path. And with each one of those decisions, something in you drains just a little more. When you pour and pour without pausing to refill, your yes loses its warmth. It becomes shallow and thin, kind of like tea that's been steeped too many times. And once your yes loses its warmth, it's no longer generosity. It becomes obligation dressed up in charm. People can feel that. The universe notices too. Energy doesn't lie, even when we dress it up to sound cheerful. Balance, however, makes generosity real again. A wholehearted, full-body yes carries more power than 100 yeses offered from exhaustion. A grounded no gives shape to your life and anchors your energy in a way that wild overgiving never could. That no becomes an investment in the right yes. The yes that moves your work forward and honors your capacity. The yes that teaches others what healthy exchange with you actually looks like. So here's your invitation. Notice where overgiving sneaks into your days because it rarely walks in through the front door. It tends to slip in through habit, through guilt, through a desire to be helpful or liked or useful. Notice where your yes leaps out of your mouth before you've even checked in with yourself. Notice where your limits get nudged by guilt or old conditioning. And then try an experiment. A pause before you answer. A no that lets you breathe just a little bit deeper. Or a small boundary that feels slightly daring and entirely needed. Your nervous system will learn from that moment. It will learn that you can hold your ground without losing connection. It will learn that you're still good, you're still kind, and still loved, even when you don't give it all away. Generosity without balance burns out. It flickers and dims and eventually disappears. But generosity rooted in equilibrium, rooted in discernment, and in the wisdom of knowing when to say yes and when to say no, that becomes something entirely different. It becomes sustainable, even sacred. It becomes the kind of generosity that changes lives, including your own. And that is where overflow begins, which really is the beginning. Thanks for tuning in to the Inspiritude Effect. If this sparked something in you and you'd like to come hang out for more inspiring conversations, hit follow and share it with someone who would benefit from walking their own inspired path. In the show notes of each episode, you'll find links to aligned resources and content that will keep you moving toward your best life. And remember, the whisper is never random. Let it lead. You belong where it's taken you.